Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience. We'll just wait a few more seconds for everyone to join in and then we'll kick off. Awesome. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. A quick introduction. I am Garima and I lead the product and partner marketing efforts here at SearchUnify, and I shall be your host for the webinar. I would like to welcome everyone again who has taken out time from their busy schedules to join us today. First things first, the webinar, Beating the Escalation Blues with Cognitive Technology, is being hosted by SearchUnify, a unified cognitive platform for elevating end-to-end customer and employee experiences. Before we kick off, a quick note here on the housekeeping. All attendees will be in the listen-only mode. In case you have any questions through the webinar, please feel free to add them to the Zoom question panel and we shall address them at the very end. In case of any technical issues, rest assured, our backup systems will help us get back online in just a few seconds. And finally, we shall also share the recording with everyone after the webinar to review the same in your own time. I now have the pleasure of introducing our guest speakers for the day. Francoise Tourniaire is the author of The Art of Support and founder of FT Works, a firm that provides consulting, training, and coaching services to the customer success and support organizations of technology companies. Welcome, Francoise, to the webinar. It is great to have you join us.
Thank you.
We also have joining us today Brian Corcoran, SearchUnify's global support evangelist and resident KCS certified practitioner. He brings over a decade of experience in helping support and service teams blend people and AI capabilities to create differentiated customer experiences at scale. Welcome, Brian. Great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Garima. It's awesome to be here. Looking forward to our conversation with Francoise.
Awesome. I promise the audience it will be an interesting one. So moving on to the topic of the day, let us first begin the discussion by defining escalations. In your customer service job, you must receive a myriad of customer requests or queries on a daily basis. And we are certain you leave no stone unturned to address them to the best of your capabilities. But hey, let's be honest. Things don't always go as planned, and customers don't always go back happy with the service you provide them, no matter how hard you try. There may be instances where you mess up or where your customers misunderstand you. Maybe the product is not what they thought it would be. Maybe your product or service quality didn't meet their expectations. Regardless of what the cause may be, any situation involving an upset customer is highly uncomfortable and stressful. And having said that, we also do not want you to confuse escalations with elevations or handoffs. A lot more of these concepts and some finer differences is what we are going to be talking about today. But before we do that, it is important to understand exactly why it is important to predict and prevent escalations. Firstly, customer escalations are expensive. According to TSI research, an escalated case costs an average 10 to 20 times more than an average case. And if we talk numbers, assuming an average support ticket costs anywhere around $200, you can safely park aside approximately $4,000 for the technical resolution cost alone, which includes the time and effort cost of your support engineers, subject matter experts, development engineers, and much more. And the time and effort involved for your escalation manager, support VP, sales rep, and your CSM's efforts can shoot the business costs further up by around $4.5 to $5K. The bottom line, with these numbers in mind, it is easy to see that escalations cost support organizations a lot. Not only are escalations adding to your business costs and your resolution time, it's also where your customers feel the stress that leads to frustration and rage ratings. Escalations also increase the odds of customer churn. Customers expect fast, efficient resolutions when they reach out, and not meeting those expectations can make any customer feel irritated. Now, before we jump into our conversation with Francois and Brian and discuss all these concepts and more, around the right escalation management strategy, I would want to open a poll to our audience. And we basically want to ask that as a support leader, what is the biggest challenge you face when dealing with customer escalations? A, is it preventing escalations in the first place? B, is it predicting which cases are likely to escalate? C, is it prioritizing and managing escalations to a positive conclusion? Or finally, is it identifying your root cause signals which will help you prevent future escalations? We let the audience answer for a few seconds. Cool. I think let's weigh in on what our audience thinks is their biggest challenge. Oh wow. The options A and B get some of the highest votes here. So Brian, based on the results from the poll and of course your experience, the right escalation management framework, in our opinion, does two things. It reduces friction for the customer while also improving the customer support team ability to handle more requests within a given time period. With that, I shall hand off the baton to you and Francois to walk our audience through the 5 proven strategies to transform their customer escalations from resource drains to fruitful experiences for customers and organizations. All yours, Brian.
All right, thank you, Garima. Francois, I think that was pretty interesting poll results and kind of aligns with what we had thought. So really excited to kick off our conversation. So just to get things started, Francois, in keeping in mind the stats that we saw on the cost of escalations and also where the focus is from our attendees, it makes sense that you might want to adopt a mindset that we must prevent every escalation we possibly can. What are your thoughts on this approach, and is it really even achievable or sustainable?
Great, Brian. Well, I'm too very happy that people think that preventing is the most important challenge that they have in front of them. So is it possible to prevent escalations? Yes. Is it possible to prevent every single escalation in the world? No. So I think we need to embrace the fact that there will be escalations. If you work in a complex support environment, you will have escalations, but you should have very, very few. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do good case management, and good case management is going to be our prevention strategy.
Glad we agree on that. I think it's apparent that if you are closing as many cases as you can proactively, we're going to see fewer of these escalations to have to jump into. So if we're thinking about how to prevent these escalations, Francois, what is the first step we should be considering?
So the first step is really the first step, and it is to give the case to the right person. So it starts at the very beginning. What can we do to identify somebody who will be maybe not the best person to resolve the case, but a good person to resolve the case? Because if we do that, then they will be able to handle the situation quickly. And as we know, a case that's quickly handled rarely escalates.
I think that's a great call out. And just thinking about, how we've thought about this with our clients, this is where intelligent case routing can really be valuable for helping automate what traditionally has been a manual process and checking the queue for stale cases. In fact, we actually built a case assignment engine using levers like agent expertise and the issue resolution history and availability for actually meeting those SLAs for routing the cases to the right agent. And hopefully these people are knowledgeable enough to hopefully solve the issue. And more importantly, they're available to do so. So even looking at the example, there's a handful of agents here that all have some great expertise, but it doesn't make sense to route it to the top 2 because one is already in the middle of the case, can't be interrupted, and the other is, offline, could be on vacation. So Martha is our best candidate to help solve that issue because they have sufficient knowledge to hopefully solve it, and they're also available. And so I think what we find there is that that's going to help just reduce the reactiveness in terms of, okay, case comes in, who's going to handle it? Some people will opt in, others won't. So I think this gives us a good starting point. All right, so now that we have the cases to the best person we could find at the time, sometimes that person will still need help, right? And wishing that the team is going to self-organize and collaborate to prevent case escalations sounds great on the surface, but that probably isn't enough. What are your thoughts on that?
It is not. Wishing is not managing, as we know, right? So the thing that's very important to me is to have a process and ideally a tool underlying that process so that I can do two things. One is I can ask for help easily. Sometimes I don't know whom to ask, right? So it should be easy to do that. And then the second part is there should be somebody on the other side who is eager to help me. And as we just saw in your little slide here, people are busy. So that's what we need to figure out is how do I ask for help? And then there's another side of help, which is to organize an old-fashioned scrum, right? Once a day or twice a day, can we just all get together and look at our difficult cases? But certainly there needs to be an asynchronous process for, hey, I need help right now.
And so are you thinking of that being the case tracking system itself, messaging tools? What are some ways that we might be thinking about asynchronous tools?
Yes, those are usually the things that people do. So I personally really liked if we can integrate that into the case tracking tool, because we want to be able to figure out who did what to whom, right? After the fact. How many people asked for help? Why did they ask for help? Who helped them? What was the result of the help, right? And we want to gather all of that as much as possible in one tool. So that's what I would do. I would use the tool, whatever is available from there, as opposed to something that's disconnected. A lot of organizations today use disconnected tool to ask for help. That's the truth. I don't think it's the best practice, but that's the truth.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And, I think when we're talking about agents receiving or giving effective help, even if it's not their case, normally we're looking at, there being like modes of recognition that help show that, the impact of opting into those cases did have, a better bottom line effect on the customer issue, the customer relationship. And, this is something that we're finding that is necessary across individual and team levels. So we've actually built a case escalation scorecard to track key behaviors and recognize those opt-ins. So not to go through it in detail, but that would be our next slide, I believe. Next one, Garima. And so this just highlights, different ways that we're recognizing the impact across the team in terms of the number of opt-ins that we have, the response time for those who are actually opting in to give the help, and also the impact in terms of the corpus of your case health. Are we trending in the right direction in terms of mean time to resolution, classic metrics, and things like that?
That sounds
cool.
good.
So
need.
Now that exactly. So now that we've gone through that, and I've kind of geeked out over the escalation scorecard, is there anything else on the prevention front that we should be thinking?
Well, there's all of the basic stuff that we're thinking about. So, for example, we really want to train all the support engineers to be very good about making commitments to customers and meeting those commitments. I would say when the issue in an escalation is related to service, very often is, I don't know what's going on, right? I was left hanging. I had no idea what was happening on my slide, on my case, right? So that is an issue. The other thing is managing backlog, right? So yes, managers should look at backlog and help the support engineers figure out where they are, et cetera. But it's up to each individual to do that. I remember years ago working with a gentleman whose name shall remain unnamed, who every Friday had 50 cases in the queue that were done, really. He just had not closed them. That's not really a good way to do things. And we really want people to take ownership for their own cases and their own backlog. So basic stuff, but I mean, blocking and tackling, right? But it is important.
Absolutely. So we talked about prevent. So let's go ahead and take it to the next step, which would be detect. And so Garima, I believe we have a poll question here
Yes.
just to kind of help set the frame with our audience. So why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Perfect. So a quick pause here to ask our audience if they are currently using any technology to detect escalations. Option A, yes. Option B, no, but you're actively researching some technology. Option C, no, but you are aware of existing tools. And finally, no, but you don't know that such tools also exist. So we'll give our audience a few seconds to fill in their responses.
So while we wait, right, I just want to make one point, which is we can certainly sit there and just wait for escalations to happen, and they will, no worries. But there is a much better way, which is to be proactive. So that's what we're trying to get to next, is to see how technology can help us anticipate before somebody gets really angry, right? Can we figure out, okay, this case needs a little bit of attention? So that's, after the poll, that's going to be my first question for Brian, is what can we do to help ourselves, essentially?
Yeah, and in the meantime, I'll just reiterate that, reactive escalations coming from outside of the organization, from sales, or worse, a company executive. I mean, those are, there's nothing worse than starting hot like that. So I agree that being able to detect early and often is definitely going to be massively valuable.
So do we have results, Garima? Oh yeah, we do.
Yeah. Yes. So most of the audience says that they are not using any technology, and most of them do not know that such tools exist.
Wonderful. So, Brian, I think you have a pretty open field here to show people that not only does it exist, but it actually works. So can you show us?
Absolutely. Garima, could you just give me the screen sharing rights, and I'll go ahead and walk everybody through for 2 minutes.
All yours, Brian.
All right, fantastic. Okay. So I think before we even jump into this, I think it's first important to echo what you said earlier, Francoise. The more that we resolve cases thoroughly and quickly, the fewer escalations that we're going to hopefully have to manage. Now, with that being said, technology can definitely help us avoid the need to go on these never-ending quests through the queue to find these potential escalations. Here at SearchUnify, our clients are actually proactively detecting these issues by using our Escalation Predictor app. And so what you see on the screen is that Escalation Predictor ingests the corpus of your support case details, historical customer interactions, and actually predicts the probability of escalations for each request in your support queue. So here's a quick view on how it works. So as a manager, support agent, instead of scanning the queue for those stale cases, I can actually see the likelihood to escalate, which is over here, along with some sentiment analysis. So you can understand what's the temperature of the user before we jump in. When I click on the case number, I'm actually presented with all of the escalation factors, whether it's average wait time, previous escalation, things like that, all the historical elements that could lead toward indicating this is an escalation. We can go ahead and take those signals and then make an informed decision along with the sentiment analysis from the case, from the interactions that are happening. And at that agent level, we can either acknowledge and decide to take on this case ourselves, or we can reject it. We can say that might not be an escalation, but we can still, ensure that it's being triaged quickly. So that's just a quick overview in terms of how that works. Let me go ahead and just stop my screen share there, and we'll go ahead and jump right back in.
Okay. So Brian, that was really interesting. I really like the idea that your tool kind of shows its work, right? It's like, here are the factors that I think are telling me that this thing is about to escalate. I bet after a while, your customers probably just trust it, right? They don't even look necessarily at the details. So can you tell us a little bit about the outcome, right? Because it's cool to be using this tool, right? What do your clients say? I mean, does it really help them?
Yeah, it has been helping them. And there's just a quick example that I'll share is that, one of our clients, they're a well-known leader in the analytics space. They've achieved a 37% reduction on case escalations within 6 months using Escalation Predictor. And so the key points I want to mention.
You said 37%, 37, right?
37, not 3.7,
Okay,
37. Yeah, it's a pretty good reduction that we're seeing. in addition to practicing, effective knowledge reuse, capturing knowledge through those escalations is also helping. So it's the signals that we're getting, but also how are you triaging those cases, and how are you capturing knowledge and sharing it effectively as a byproduct of solving those issues. The one thing that's been pretty interesting, Francoise, is that what we're hearing is that there's a lot more clarity earlier on in the case lifecycle in terms of understanding if this case has any potential to escalate. So I think we're seeing trust there in terms of understanding that we don't have to go in every single time. Using the historical interactions we have can also help inform future decisions. And now what we're seeing is that escalations has kind of become like a spectator sport, in the sense that support agents are watching the signals and seeing if they can jump in and offer help. And I think that definitely flips the script compared to walking down a contact center, tapping on someone's shoulder and asking them for help. So it's been transformative, to say the least.
Yeah, that's really quite impressive indeed. Yeah.
Cool. So you can tell that I'm a fan of technology and geeking out in what's possible on the technical side. But something that is bound to happen if we're routing to people who are sufficient to solve is there may be instances, I can imagine, I've been there myself, where I'm working on an issue and I suspect something's not right. The case has been routed to me. I should have the expertise, but maybe there's a disconnect somehow. So how would we think about trying to collaborate when something isn't right? How do we start?
Yeah, so obviously technology is wonderful, and I love what you showed to me. I happen to think that human beings are wonderful as well. And human beings, as you say, they can tell when something is going south typically. So I think what's holding people back in the support centers that I work with are two things. One is shame, and the other one is shaming. Okay, so shame is, I'm a support engineer. I know this case is not going well, but I'm not going to say anything because, I'm supposed to be solving it. And if I say I need help, then it's, admitting that I've failed in a way. And obviously that internal shame, right, is compounded by potentially the manager saying, how dare you, bring me an issue? You really should be solving it yourself. So I think there's a lot of psychological, change management work to be done around the fact that it's not only okay to raise your hand and say, hey, this thing is not going well, but it's actually encouraged because it's a lot easier to handle an issue, at the beginning. Right?
Absolutely. And, that focuses on, the cases that we're picking up and seeing potential escalations. We still, based on our conversation a few minutes ago, would still plan on having other reactive escalations that we have to deal with, right?
Yes. So there will be escalations from, well, exactly who, and customers, sales reps, sometimes executives, right? So these things will happen. My recommendation is to make it really easy to escalate. I know you're going to think, wow, isn't that the other way around? No, it should be very easy to escalate because you want to know early. The worst escalation is the escalation that comes from your boss's boss, and everybody is worried and tense and all of that. That's bad, right? If you know early on, then you're going to be able to do something about it. So have an escalation button on the support side, have a really well publicized way to escalate internally, right? So that it doesn't go through 5 levels. And again, people get all tense and worried about. And I could see Phil is in the chat is saying every complaint is a gift, every escalation is a gift, wrapped gift. I totally completely agree. There's a book, by the way, that's called Every Complaint is a Gift. It's one of my favorite books of all time for support people. Anyway, I kind of got sidetracked. Sorry, Brian.
No, don't
Make it really easy to escalate. Right.
Don't even apologize. I think it's counterintuitive, especially being an agent, and especially when we're working away from our cohort of fellow agents. I remember sitting in call centers and having cases come in, and if we heard somebody talking on the phone, other agents would kind of start snooping in and get a sense of, oh, what's that issue? So I think it's very important that when people are working remotely or even in small teams, make it okay for them to escalate. Make it okay for the customer to say, hey, I don't know what's going on. I need to escalate. I think having both of those options is certainly valuable.
Yep.
Cool. So I think that brings us on to the third category. And so if we think about that, we've tried to prevent as many escalations as we reasonably can, and then also detecting escalations and knowing that some come from, the case queue and some are coming from other areas of the organization. We actually now have a bunch of escalation candidates. And with that being said, whether it's coming from CSM, sales reps, customers, partners, or the support queue, what does it mean to actually screen escalations, Francoise?
Well, I love the fact that you say that we have escalation candidates. That's my whole point, right? Is at this point, what you have is you have people raising their hands, right? And people raising their hands does not necessarily equate to a full escalation. Garima just showed us terrifying figures for how much it costs to have an escalation, right? We don't want to go there every time. We want to go there when needed, but we don't want to go there every single time. So we need to do a screening. What I like to do is to have some kind of a checklist or rubric that we use. Garima, if you could show us an example. Keep it very, very simple and just have a bunch of characteristics on the left-hand side, right? And then you just rate them. You will do this for every single candidate, as Brian is just said, right? And just say, is this a key account? Does he have exec visibility? Is there revenue at risk? Whatever criteria you want to have there. And I am not kidding. This particular example here, 7 criteria, is perfectly good to screen, right? So the idea is every request goes through this, and some requests will not need to be an escalation. For example, a customer escalates and they say, I have not heard back from my support engineer in 2 days. Is this an escalation? No, it's just tap on the shoulder of the support engineer or find somebody else to get back to them. It's probably not an escalation, right? As opposed to this, our business is on the line and we are going to, post our displeasure on social media and we are not going to renew. And by the way, I'm best friends with your CTO, blah, blah, blah. That's probably an escalation. Right? So that's what we are trying to do. Keep it really simple and just keep that right in the tracking system, right? So that we know there was an escalation request and we denied it because, the number was too low or we went forward with it. Very straightforward.
And I think simple is good in this regard. I mean, when escalations start happening and you have 15 different criteria, I wish the best of luck to you to try and make sense of that. So I think being concise and simple is the way to go. I think that's a great call out. All right, so we've talked about screening now, and once the escalations have passed the screening, we go into what we think about when we talk about escalation management itself. And so this is about managing the escalations. And so if we're going to unpack this and from a best practices standpoint, what are some key factors that define successful escalation management?
So I'll make this very quick, and I don't think this is going to be news to anybody. There are 3 factors. One is we want to have a formal action plan. What is it that we're going to do? 2, we want to have good communication so that people know what's going on. By the way, it's not just us, support, and the customer. It's all of the hangers-on that we have in any escalation, right? All of the worried people, right? So it's the sales rep, it's the executives, it's the CSM, it's everybody else who's interested in what's happening. So communication is key. And then the third thing is probably, unless you're very small, probably you want to have some kind of dedicated staffing to do escalations, because a little escalation can wreck your whole day, right? If I have to talk with escalated customers, it's going to be very hard for me as a manager to do other things like coach my team and do all of that, right? So if you have any volume, I think dedicated staffing is probably a good idea. So we all know this stuff, we just have to do it, and there's a process, right? Every time.
I think just knowing that we can get some of the hangers on I'm in sales, for example. I'm sure my team would like me to butt out when there is a potential escalation. So, I think this brings some well-needed clarity. Okay,
Right.
so I know that was kind of quick in terms of how to manage them, but we're actually going to go on to learn. And we kind of thought that we'd be done with these managed steps, but there's this learning after the fact, Francois. I think it's what we've already seen with the dashboard example and recognition. It's pretty important, but could you enlighten us into, some of the key reasons why you think this is so critical?
Sure. And I saw in the chat that there was somebody early on who said, I've tried to do escalation retrospectives, but to be honest, it's either obvious or no one wants to point fingers. Should I just give up? No, whatever your name is, do not give up. Do retrospectives. So let's think about this. The idea is you've just went through an ordeal. Let's call it what it is, right? Escalations are ordeals, right? You've just gone through something complex and expensive and painful. Wouldn't it be good to, at least for a moment, think about what went on and try to not do it again, right? So people, when I say retrospective, people get all worried because they're like, oh my God, it's going to take 5 days and it's going to require a formal report and all of that. Maybe, but probably not, right? The idea is much simpler. The idea is to say, one, why did this thing happen? And usually it's going to be one of three factors, sometimes all three, sometimes just one of them, right? So one is the fit between the product and the use case was not good, right? In other words, the customer was sold something that's not quite right. Second, it could be product quality. That's the thing that I think all our minds went there, right? There was a bug. It's not the only one, right? Yeah, there could be a bug, right? But product fit is actually worse, in my opinion, right? So product fit, bug, and the other one is service quality, right? We dropped the customers on their head, the thing fell through the cracks, whatever. Let's be honest with ourselves and say, what is it that really caused this, right? And what can we do to fix it next time? Now, next time could be, well, if the use case was bad, then we need to fix our sales process. Wow, that's really interesting, right? That's very difficult. So I don't think you need something formal every time, but I do think every time you do need to classify where did it come from. And if people are having trouble not pointing fingers, etc., you need to set the example, right? When I lead retrospectives for escalations, the first thing I would say is, let's say, Brian, the two of us have worked on the escalation. The first thing I would say is, Brian, you did this great thing, you did blah, 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 and I made a mistake. Right? And that sets the stage for, we are here to talk about what happened and to fix it, as opposed to trying to protect ourselves or whatever. I really think it's important. And by the way, some customers will want a root cause analysis, so you would need to do that anyway. But I would do it very quickly for each and every one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll call out a comment that we have from our comment section. Sorry to say comment twice in 3 words. But we have Judy had chimed in that it isn't pointing fingers if you stick to the facts. And I think there is that saying that facts don't care about your feelings. I think that it's a great call out. If we stick to what happened, and even if you did make the mistake, kind of unpacking it in the right way, that if you're having people jump in to opt in and help, and the escalation was a pain because of the collaboration that you had with that person and it was on you, are they going to want to come back and collaborate with you next time? So I think that also kind of goes into the overall reputation model in terms of how I think about it. You want to be easy to help others, but you also want to be easy to receive the help.
Yeah, and the reputation model, by the way, goes towards the retrospective as well, right? If my reputation is, oh, well, when we do retrospective, FD starts pointing fingers at everybody, nobody will want to do retrospectives with me again, right? So to me, that's an essential task of managing the escalation, is to do that at the end, right? And do that in a non-blaming manner, in a constructive manner. And usually there's much to learn in complex escalations.
Totally makes sense. It's good call outs. So I think that takes us right around to 35 past the hour, or 5 past the hour if you're in India. Garima, I think we have some other questions that were in the webinar chat.
Yes.
Francois, do we want to take a look at a few of those and try to help out while we still have folks on the call?
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm loving the engagement, by the way, on the webinar. So thank you, Francois, Brian, for putting out those facts. Francois, Nakul has a question for you. What helps to have those retrospectives, a joint meeting with the leadership and reps, or is it executive sponsorship or documented scenarios in apps? You would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, Nicole, this is a good question. So I'm going to be very opinionated, as I'm usually about these things. I would say, do not have a joint meeting with leadership and reps. It's going to terrify the reps unless you've done it a million times and it's not gone well, right? So I would have it with the doers. I would have at least if there needs to be a meeting, because it's not necessarily that you're going to have a meeting, right? Sometimes it's very simple, right? But if you're going to have a meeting with the people who worked on the escalation, and try to leave as many managers out of it as possible, right? It's easier for people to say, hey, you know, this did not go so well, if they don't feel they are being watched or they are being measured or they are being critiqued or whatever. And then you can have a formal meeting if that's what you want. Do you need to document it? I think there needs to be some kind of documentation, even it could be very brief. And as I mentioned before, sometimes customers want a formal RCA. So then you're going to have to fill in the whole thing, right? Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Francois. Debbie has another quick question. Any suggestions for a formal action plan and what that might look like?
Do we have another hour? So that's a long question, and I'm happy to answer offline if she wants to just send me an email. But the idea of the action plan is what needs to be done, who needs to do it, by when. Very simple. It's just like any plan for anything else. The difference with escalations is that, one, everybody's watching, and two, you may not have a plan that goes from A to Z, right? You may have a plan that does A, B, and C, and then we'll see, right? Usually in escalations, the first step is we need to troubleshoot the problem. So you don't really know where you're going to get. So who is troubleshooting? And what is the next step? I think that's really important for customers. And the next step may be we're going to have a check-in at 10 o'clock. That might be the best next step that you can have. So just specify who is responsible for what, and the action plan could and should probably include the customer as well, right? What does the customer need to do? Give him something to do. It's not just us.
Yeah.
I love that last part.
Yeah, thanks for that, Francois. And I think we have time for one final question. Brian, Francois, if you want to collaborate on that. How do you know when you're ready for a tool that predicts escalations? In other words, how solid should your case management strategy be before you invest?
Wow, that's a great question. So if you're waiting to have a perfect case management approach before you get a tool, you will never get a tool that's going to be very effective. So in a way, the more in trouble you are, the more you need a tool. I will let Brian comment, but I would say do not think that the tool will resolve your case management issues. It will not, right? But a tool will help you dig out from under the disaster that you may have on your hands if you have a bad case management system. So those two things are parallel. They are not substitute for each other. I don't know, Brian, if you have a thought about when to get a tool.
You know, I think your approach totally makes sense. The way that I would look at it is, you know, for our clients at SearchUnify, is what we're tending to see is there could be a gradual rollout in terms of we use cognitive search to make our world smaller in terms of content that we're reusing, how to drive our resolutions effectively. So still making sure that, you know, cases are being solved completely, thoroughly, and on time. And then I think that can also help with, you know, managing the escalations and making sure that you have the right sort of technology to support that. Because for any of these solutions, and even, you know, with the question on LLMs, is that it's garbage in, garbage out sometimes. And if we have bad case management, we might just be amplifying that reach. So I think people and process are super important. But once you are starting to see like like a couple key Paretos on case drivers where we're doing well, even that is early enough to invest in an escalation tool.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing, which is adoption, right? If you bring in a tool, people might feel really at risk, right? Because the tool is going to highlight what they're not doing well. So you need to really work with the team so that they can see it as an ally and something useful, as opposed to something that points fingers at them. But I'm a great fan of the tool. I mean, I think if you are in a situation where things are out of control, your main problem is coping with this flow of problem, and the tool will help you. So I don't think you should say, well, I have too many other problems. I'm going to delay getting this helper. But don't just say the tool will solve my problems. I think that would be a big mistake.
I think that's fair. I think when we're talking about escalation predictor, detect, but we still have to screen and then manage. So if we follow those steps, it should give us a clear path to achieve the outcomes that we're hoping for. And
one more thing, I want to talk about retrospectives one last time. If you have the tool, right, you will do your escalations, do a retrospective at the end. And if every retrospective says, oh, we let this case fall through the cracks. Oh, this case was never responded to. Oh, this case, well, then we know exactly where in the case management we have a problem. So that's the other thing, right? Is use the retrospective to tell you where do you have problems. If your retrospectives are all the product fit is bad, you will continue to have escalations no matter what. Right?
Makes total sense. There you have it, folks. An eye-opening exploration of how the right combination of strategy and technology can help you manage escalations effectively. Francoise, Brian, a big thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us today. And to our incredible audience, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep supporting your customers with excellence. We'll definitely share across the recording on email. And of course, if you have any further questions, please feel free to drop them by. Thank you so much, everyone.